Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this very little guy right here. This is the Alliance Designs Pat Hammond Scout. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, this guy was sent to me directly by Alliance Designs. After I visited him at Blade Show and realized, hey, they're making good stuff, I reached out to him. I said, hey, can I check one of these guys out? They sent it along. They let me keep this one. I'll send the other one back in exchange for it doing a charitable kind of thing. That's a beautiful thing. I'm very happy about that. But nevertheless, this will be charitably given away at some point in time or another. Keep an eye out for that in the future. But nevertheless, we do have to assume that this is the best quality controlled knife that they have ever made, having sent it to me. And we also have to assume that I'm doing my best not to let that affect the quality of my review. But anyways, there you go. Next thing, size comparison. This thing is not very large. Here it is against your Ontario Rat number 2, your Spyderco Delica, and your Spyderco PM2. So you can see that in terms of sharpened blade length, we are well below the PM2 here, but we're actually right in the vicinity of your Delica. This is a relatively small little knife. That's going to be a good thing for a lot of folks. And then finally, this is based on a custom design, the Mini Scout from Pat Hammond, but implemented by Alliance. Alliance is a relatively new company. They are working with a variety of manufacturers that overseas, always, I gather. But nevertheless, they are working with a bunch of manufacturers to make these kinds of things possible. They don't say exactly who this one was, but it's RWL34, and the quality of the machining and whatnot gives me some creative ideas. But nevertheless, we will go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting, very little knife. So on the good side, this is honestly a joy to carry. It is a very, very small knife. I mean, here, I'll go ahead and measure the blade length up on this guy. We are coming in here just under, like 2.3 or something inches. It's under 2.5 uncontroversially, which is a beautiful thing, but it is also relatively tiny and relatively lightweight as well. We're coming in at 1.59 ounces for, 2.5 or less than 2.5 inches worth of blade, and it is also very, very small in the pocket. I mean, if we compare this guy to the Rat 2, it's like, oh my God, this thing is tiny. And thinness-wise, it's very, very thin as well. This is very, very easy to carry. Has a very good clip with plenty of ramp, a good amount of flex here. I mean, this is a very nice clip, but altogether, this guy kind of disappears in the pocket. That's a beautiful thing. I very much enjoyed that. Next thing, on the size of this guy. This is coming in under 2.5 inches. Now, that's a relatively small blade, certainly, but this is going to be a beautiful thing for people living in locations with length restrictions. There are places like Boston, Cleveland, etc., I think Chicago. I talked to a lawyer, not a jackass on YouTube, but nevertheless, that have restrictions on what you can wear, what you can carry, and 2.5 inches is a common line for that, and so that's good. I'll also say it's not super intimidating. Some of the anodization, just the overall effect of it, is more cute than anything. And so this is going to be a much better office choice than, for instance, I don't know, all kinds of other crazy options out there. So that's a good thing. Next thing, when this guy is open, the ergonomics on it are pretty solid. It fits well in the hand. This little bit of grooving here gives you a fair amount of support. A fair amount of traction, that is. And it's just the clip itself is well positioned and slightly rounded across the top. Makes it very easy to grip onto. It's actually, it's very nice in the hand, I have to say that, at least when it's open. Next thing, there are lots of color choices. You can get it in this nice blue. You can get them in purple. I think there's a green. There are all kinds of options for you, which is great. Allows you to accessorize. Get one for each one of your outfits or something like that if you go full fashion blogger on the affair. Next thing, this has a very nice blade. It is RWL34, and it is actually ground very thin. It's using very thin stock, which absolutely helps, but it has thin stock, a thin edge, a nice grind, and frankly, a nice finish overall. You can see here, there's sort of a machine satin finish that matches the handle on this part of the blade, and then down here, it's more of a machine ground sort of thing, but look, it's a good blade. It works. It's very, very nice for just everyday life. This is a solid blade, 100%. So that's a joy for me. And then finally, on the good side, there were some very nice details here. This is a knife that is relatively small, but you can see that it was really thought through carefully. For instance, you get all kinds of rounding and chamfering on the sides of the flipper tab here, on the inside of the scales. No parts of these are left sharp. You get very nice little back spaces here. The clip is beautifully thought out, including this little ramp at the back here, which just allows it to be a lot nicer in the hand overall. You can see here that overall you get the engraving on it is very, very nice, and it's symmetrical on both sides, which is not something that all companies do when they engrave something. The pocket clip edges are nice. It kind of rounded a little bit, and the clip itself feels a little bit rounded and smooth with a nice satin on there. The blade area on the front here is flush when the knife is closed, which is actually always kind of a nice thing. The knife almost disappears within the handle when it's doing that. You have the just good rounding chamfering generally. The internal lock bar relief rather than external allows that design to really show. This is a really well thought out knife. I mean, you look at this and you're like, wow, somebody spent a lot of time designing the details here. And I really like that. I think this is a very, very nice knife as a result. That's really good. And so to me, that's the good, is it's got a lot of really nice details. It's got a nice blade, lots of color options. It's good ergonomics when it's open. It's 2.5 inch or under 2.5 inches, which is going to make it legal in a lot of places, and it is absolutely a joy to carry. On the great side, the finishing on this knife is great. You get things like, for instance, note that the whole handle is not the handle is not like a blasted titanium. The edges of it seem to be, but the whole handle has this sort of a horizontal satin thing, and that's mirrored in the blade. So the blade and the handle come together, except in the plunge where you get a different satin sort of finish here. The anodization on the inside there is actually beautifully shiny. It's not like full-on high polished, but it's close enough that it really catches the light in an attractive way, and you get that on both sides. The clip, too, has this beautiful machine satiny sort of finish on there. I'll try and polish that up a little bit. Look, the whole damn thing, actually, I'm sorry, it's not a satiny, but it's a very, very, it has the same optical effect, I suppose. And same thing back here. The sides of the clip are a little bit polished. I mean, honestly, just finishing-wise, this was really well done. It's very clear that they spent a lot of time thinking about exactly what each of these surface finishes should look like and trying their best. Even the screw here is nicely finished. This is a little jewel-like knife in a lot of ways. You carry this, you look at this, and it's like, wow, that's really nicely made. There's no part of the finishing that feels really lazy, and that makes it a very classy little piece. I'm actually quite impressed with it. So, to me, what's great here is that whoever is making this, in terms of factory, has done a magnificent job on the finishing. So, absolutely spectacular work there. And so, to me, that's what's great, is the finish on work on this is great. On the bad side, price is $225. Look, it's not amazing, but with this finish quality, I'm pretty okay with it. So, I'm sure I'd love to see it coming in cheaper. But at the same time, I can't complain too much. No real argument there. Next thing, the sharpening choil on this guy. It does have a sharpening choil, but it's just a little bit too small. You can see here that there is just a little unsharpened area down there at the bottom. As a result, that may actually be a safety feature, because this does come awfully close at the top there. If this came to a full edge, that could be a safety thing. I'd like to see that dip down a little bit further, but, it's not dangerous, but it's close. Next thing, this could use a detent ball ramp. Not the end of the world, but if they're doing those little extra miles, that's an extra mile that's missing. Next thing, this could use some jimping on the flipper tab here. Pardon me, I think I'm about to sneeze. We'll see. Anyways, a little dramatic tension there. Will he sneeze? It does need a little bit of jimping on the flipper tab. A couple of times I've slipped off of this nice finish here, and especially given that this kind of feels like the flipper tab itself is a little bit weirdly positioned. It's weirdly far back. Although the action is good and it works well, the action, it's okay, but I feel like every time I pick this knife up, my hand isn't necessarily in the right position to adequately use this. I kind of want the flipper tab to be a little bit further forward, but in this guy, because of that flipper tab, and especially because of the lack of texture, it almost feels like the tab is backwards at some level, like it should have been, and that would have made more sense. But either way, it works, it's okay, but the flipper just feels a little weird. Aesthetically speaking, it looks pretty solid, but it doesn't super work that well for me. So, that's functionally, I'd like to see the flipper tab maybe changed or tweaked or something like that, changed and tweaked to the same thing. Anyways, there you go. And finally, on the bad side, this is a little small even for me. Now, I don't necessarily mean that in terms of like, oh, the blade length is too low or anything like that, but this is a knife that is tricky to manipulate. Very often as I was using this, it was just a little tough. Right now I've got it in my hand, it's easy, but I found myself every time I pull it out having to do a little bit of like, okay, hold on, let's get everything into position. Look, this is probably something I would get much better at, carrying this for weeks and months. But over a couple of days, didn't quite do that for me. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of the exact size approach here. I mean, being very thin, very small, etc. It's fiddly, even in my smaller hands than most. So to me, all of that is the bad, is that it's a little bit small for me. It's tricky to manipulate as a result. The flipper tab feels a little bit strangely designed in terms of its positioning and the lack of jimping on here. It's got a very nice action. That's not a bad thing. Why do I have that listed in bad? Because I'm crazy, whatever. It does need a little bit of jimping there. It could use a dent ball ramp. The sharpening choil is a little bit small, although that might be a safety feature due to the knife being a little creepy in the back there, and the price on it is not amazing, but it's, it's okay. On the ugly front, there's just one ugly thing. As you've been watching this review, you've probably been seeing me doing this a lot to unlock the knife, where I come in here with a fingernail. Given the lockup is about 50%, which is good, that's solid, there is unfortunately not any lock bar cutaway on this side. In fact, it almost looks like the lock bar over here is a little higher than the lock bar down here. And so as a result, this knife is very much a jam your thumb in there and hope for the best sort of knife. There is not good lock bar access here. There's no cutout. They've done a little tiny bit of scalloping, luckily, because otherwise I'd be using a pry bar or something. They get in there. But really, I don't like the fact that there's no scalloping at all here. This liner is not a little bit lower, because that just makes this a lot harder to open. This is my biggest issue with this knife, and probably the only thing that's stopping it from being an uncontroversial gem. It's just not a great knife to close, given you're not going to probably be doing it this often. This is a smaller knife, a fancier carry, so this probably isn't going to be coming in and out of your pocket all damn day. But nevertheless, that's definitely the ugliest thing to me, is that the lock bar access here just isn't very good, and as a result, I feel like, it's just the unlocking not that great. So to me, that's the uglies. The lock bar access just isn't very good. Final conclusion, this is a very neat little knife. I like it actually a lot. And the more I've carried it, the more time I spent with it, the more I like it. Because it is very ergonomic when open in the hand. It's got a nice blade. It's an easy to carry side. It's got some very nice details, and the finishing work on it really is great. I really hope that Alliance continues to offer these kinds of higher end finishings, because that's a way to really distinguish themselves from their competition. A lot of stuff, especially in this $200 range, relatively, vanilla blasted finishes or stone washes and things like that. This is better. This is really nice. And so I very much like seeing this level of finishing here. And it does elevate it a little bit. And honestly, that elevation, oh God, that's pretentious. Anyways, it's that may be the best thing about this. This ends up being a very versatile knife in terms of your, if you think about this is someplace in between the ultra-light carry sort of approach and a gentle person's folder. I mean, it is just fancy enough to work fine in slacks. I feel like this has absolutely no problem being a knife that you could keep in a suit. And you'd pull this out and people are like, oh, that's kind of classy. Neat, look at that. But at the same time, it wouldn't look out of place if you're just wearing shorts. I mean, sorry, I've gone all-fashioned blogger on you there, but still, that is definitely, it's a nice thing in that way. This is a knife that can do both. It's not so crazy, fancy, traditional or anything like that it's going to be completely ridiculous on most days. This is a good all-arounder sort of knife. Unfortunately, it does have some downsides. It's a little pricey, but not that bad considering the finishing. Whatever. It's got a slightly off choil. The ergonomics on flipping this guy are a little bit weird. The size makes it a little tricky even for me to manipulate. It's got poor lock bar access, making every close a little tiny battle. And, but ultimately, a lot of those things are things that could be tweaked very subtly. I mean, just like scoop this down a little bit in a future iteration of it. That could be nice. And, just a little jimping. The version 2 of this guy, the Scout number 2, I guess the Eagle Scout would be the, whatever, that would be absolutely astounding. But even as it stands, I can very easily see a lot of people really liking this knife. Even with those issues, and that the lock bar thing is ugly, I still like this knife a lot. It's a nice choice as a fancy folder, as a sort of gentle person's knife. It is a nice choice as a lightweight small folder. The size will make it a good legal option, and it's just freaking pretty. 100% it is attractive. It is really nicely finished, nicely done, and it is a Lion showing off some pretty impressive finishing work. So if you're looking for something like this that is quick and light, then you might absolutely consider adding a Scout to your party. So there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.